Okay. All right, Heather, can I start the meeting?
Yes, please.
Okay. It is 6:01, and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I think it's also worth taking note of the new COVID restrictions that are coming down today for the next 2 weeks, and I'm confident that Lunenburgers will adhere to the letter and the spirit of those public health directives and do everything they can to stay safe, stay well, and take care of one another. With those announcements, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda, although I would note from the CAO that we would add a late-breaking request for a potential tree removal related to a development, and that would be added in 7B. Does that accurately characterize the request, B?
Yes, that's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. So if councilors are amenable to that, I will look to a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by Councilor Ernst, seconded by Councilor Duggan. Any discussion or debate, additions or deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Jenny, I assume just for record keeping that was in favor.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work my camera.
Okay, no worries. That takes us on to the council meeting minutes of April 13th. And I would look for a motion to approve those minutes as circulated. Moved by Councilor Bertle, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. That takes us on to public hearings and presentations. And tonight we are fortunate to have representatives of the Plan B Housing Society with us to discuss the Plan B housing project. And it is 6:02, so we will give them 10, or 6:03 rather, we'll give them 10 minutes to present, followed by 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. My name is Virginia Stephen, and with me are Fawn Creaser and Ann Weeks. And we're part of a group that started where all things in Lunenburg seem to start, at the coffee tables at the market, and talking fairly altruistically about where we might live after we could no longer handle the stairs in our lovely new homes in Lunenburg, and how we could stay here. And that evolved a bit over time, and the membership has evolved as well, and we became more frequent as we went along. What it boiled down to was thinking about a big picture about what we wanted Lunenburg to look like, and what kind of environment we'd like to live in, or that we would like to be seeing other people living in our community. So we saw our role as looking at what some of the options are for innovative housing, for aging in place, or right sizing, for rental, for eco-friendly housing. Something that provides the right fit for individuals and ensures their well-being. So we're looking broadly at a community, which may or may not be in one spot. We're going to go through the presentation, sort of bouncing back and forth between us. So Ann's going to tell us a little bit about what we recognized in our explorations and thoughts over the last 4 years.
Okay. Where, here, click on this. No. All right, I guess I'll just start because for some reason we're not coming up on it. So can everyone hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so early on what we did is we interviewed a number of people throughout town because we wanted to see where all the various needs were in town, we were actually quite surprised by some of the things we learned. And that's where our focus began, was looking at how we could find appropriate housing, not just for seniors, but for workers in town, people who have permanent jobs here in town and can't find housing, families who can't find housing, but also short-term professionals who come to town, sometimes lawyers who might come to work on a project for a while, educate students at the LAMP that come for educational reasons, and the Eurocenter students. And those needs have grown considerably in the 4 years that we have worked on this, to the point where we're actually at a bit of a crisis situation. We have seen some of the businesses in town who've looked for creative ways to deal with this by buying houses to house some of their workers, but we were looking to find a community model that we could use that would hopefully satisfy all the different areas where we have problems that have arisen.
So what we discovered about our core group as we evolved was that we don't want to be developers, nor do we have the financial means to do so, but we're really willing and eager to work with developers and with the town to provide input and insight and to bounce ideas off. We have a lot of skills in our group. We're good researchers and thinkers and investigators, and we're kind of on a roll with that. And we know that as a group, we have varied interests in community development, but community development is central to all of us in the group. So we're big picture thinkers, and we want to be part of that big picture in the best way that we can with the talents that we have.
So we have then spent this time doing more research in that we've toured properties in town that might benefit our plan, looking at pretty much 10 acres would be the minimum. We've actually gone and looked at specific communities, two that have stood out for us, in the Maples and Antigonish, which is actually a support community for seniors, but we looked at it in terms of the model of the buildings there and the community, not as a senior community. And we've also looked at the concept of pocket neighborhoods. We've learned about different technologies. We've looked into wastewater technology alternatives, because we realize that the wastewater treatment plant in town is near capacity. We've looked at different energy options. We've also talked to local developers, 4 altogether. The latest one we've talked to, we were quite excited about, because they seem to not only understand our vision, but also understand that we are looking at Project Lunenburg and wanting to make sure that what we have an interest in doing coincides with CCP. On.
Virginia?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. We also looked at what we would see as priorities for a new neighborhood. And in looking at a new neighborhood, that would be if we were able to get a fairly large parcel of land to create a new neighborhood within the community of Lunenburg. It also, though, means that we may look for pockets of land around Lunenburg to build smaller units, because that's what we're all about, is actually about housing. And looking at the priorities, you can see the list that's on the screen, and it has a lot to do with green spaces and accessible units and using low maintenance, long lasting materials, having lots of private spaces in the outdoors. Also looking at a variety of housing types, single family, duplex, townhouses, apartment buildings, that kind of thing. And of course, with COVID, the ability to work from home, or also the ability to just be adaptable, which we've learned through COVID. To be able to walk to services, to be LEED compliant, and LEED is leadership in energy and environmental design, which is a big concept in construction these days. an innovative aesthetic, which in Lunenburg, we are so well known for our heritage, but in modern day, we could also be known for innovative design and being leaders in Nova Scotia for doing that. We looked at possibly having shared spaces that people within that neighborhood could use, like kitchens and meeting rooms and such. And then one that I didn't touch on was about the cost of units. When we started this, it was before the real estate boom, and the concept of affordable was much lower than it is now. So I will address that in the statistics section also. Virginia?
So all of these things led us to think about how could we participate and what kind of a model could we see as working to develop the kind of pocket neighborhood that we're hankering for. I should just say that the the images that are scattered through are from a book called Pocket Neighborhoods. It's also a site online. So it is up and running, small pocket neighborhoods from around the continent. We, of course, want to see a model that's compliant with the Comprehensive Community Plan. We want to see mixed housing, and we want to see a strong design aesthetic. And that's kind of the model. It's a model of partnership, and it's a model of excellence, finding the right fit for the way that we and others want to live in the town.
A few statistics just very quickly, because this talks about the issue of affordability and the issue that there is not much inventory out there. So as of today still, there are only 5 single-family homes for sale in the town of Lunenburg. When we looked in 2013, there were 42 houses that we were able to look at. And just to look down a little bit further, you can see that this year, probably in this past year, there will be 46 homes that will be sold here. However, the monthly supply of homes, according to the real estate board, the monthly supply is down 66.7%, which again makes affordability a huge issue. So you can see on the listing below that you can see all the numbers there, like extreme for this area. But in terms of the inventory of homes for sale, that is where the issue of affordability, and one thing that can come of that, when you look at affordability, is actual design and how that would work. Trying to fit smaller units within bigger complexes to keep that price down. And we'll close with Anne.
What we're proposing is that we develop a partnership, whether it be a task force, a committee, with the town, to use all the research we've done over the past 4 years to address specifically what's happening in the town of Lunenburg, rather than what right now is happening is looking at Lunenburg County more overall, that we would like to try to look specifically at Lunenburg. And we basically are offering ourselves as facilitators with the work that we have done. And most of us have some time on our hands, so we can also continue to help. And we would love to see some sort of group formed to address what clearly is becoming a crisis in our very beautiful town. And we do think that there are some creative ways to solve the problem.
Thank you.
And thus ends our presentation.
Thank you. Right on time, which we always know is appreciated by the chair. That leaves us with 5 minutes for questions, if any councillors have any questions for the presenters. Councillor Sanford?
Just curious as to what you found out about wastewater options, if there's anything that you could share with us.
Sure, we actually met with Able Engineering, and they went through several options having to do, the term is clustered
septic systems.
Yes, and that it's environmentally good. And some of the sites that we have thought about here in town, including Blockhouse Hill, are actually really, really good sites for that type of system. So we do know, we found out that to actually put together a plan on any one property would run about $10,000. And we would hope, if we find an interested developer builder, that those types of costs are things that they would take on.
And also that clustered septic systems can be owned by a development, or they can be turned
Right.
over if they're done to a certain standard. They can actually be turned over to a town or a municipality, and both are occurring at the moment throughout Nova Scotia. There are examples of both happening.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from councilors? Councillor Halverson?
If I can get myself unmuted. Yeah, you alluded to this in your answer, but I was curious if you had specific sites within the town of Lunenburg that you'd be interested in pursuing.
Well, we had, really the original one we looked at was the Home Port, which has since sold because it's about not quite 11 acres and it's walkable to town. Clearly, Blockhouse Hill is another possibility. However, as I know I have shared with a couple of council members prior to this, we know that there are probably other pieces of land within town that would be appropriate. For us, really, one of the primary concerns was walkability, because we think that's important for seniors. It's important for families, that walkability. Ed, I see you walking all the time with your daughter. And one of the things that we saw when we visited the Maples in Antigonish, they were able to build that community about 2 kilometers outside of town, but that's because Antigonish has a circulator bus, which comes through the Maples every hour on the hour. And so it gives that ability to get into town. We don't have that here. Now, if transportation here were to change, it would open up all sorts of possibilities. I know there's a large property up off of Masons Beach Road that's about 45 acres that is not currently on the market, but the family has expressed interest in selling it, but it's not walkable. So that for us has always been one of the things that we have focused on.
And we did, as Ann said, looked at Homeport, but there are also some other properties that would have to be combined that are along the Victoria Road corridor, all down through there. So those are possibilities also, land combinations.
Okay, any further questions from council? Councillor Halverson?
As I have no one else is going to go, I'll go. And I'll ask the question I always ask. Money. Where are you with, have you pursued any funding options? Have you looked into, are there grants? Is there funding from private sources that could help you facilitate, getting this built?
We actually do know there are some grants. Early on in the process, we talked with David Harrison. I don't know if you're familiar with David, but I'm sure some of the other people on town hall are. And he did say that there were a number of things that we could access. However, we've been very clear from the start that we personally don't have money to invest in this. I do know that one of the educational centers said that they would be able to invest some in it. But when we have talked with developers, we've been very, very clear that this is a concept we would want a developer to take on, that there's not money coming from all of us to invest in this. Looks like Melissa.
Very quickly, Councillor Duggan, we're coming up on the 5 minutes.
Yeah, and just wanting clarification on one thing. So you guys are hoping to see something not just specifically for seniors or aging adults, but something that is family and so a combination of both?
A
Yes.
combination of everything,
Yes,
Um,
even.
all sizes and shapes.
Yes.
So
awesome.
Melissa, to give you an example, the main building at the Maples, they have rentals in there that can be short-term and long-term plus community space. So if you, for instance, had a student coming to LAMP for 6 months, if we had a main building that had community space in it and those types of rentals, we could have a 6-month studio, right? Rental for students, professional students like that.
Or for short term, we have a lot of contract workers in Lunenburg, you know, at HB Studios or
Right.
at Harbor Haven, a variety. So it would be for those folks also.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
That's what we meant about our trying to look at this in a way of fulfilling all the different unique needs in town, because there are quite a few.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. It's a very broad scope. So
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that takes us to the end of the allotted time for questions. Thank Plan B Housing Society for coming in and presenting to us and for the kind offer. I think at this stage, unless anyone feels otherwise, we'll take it under advisement and provide a response in due course.
Okay,
In terms
thank
of-
you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks. All right. So there are no pieces of correspondence or proclamations or petitions. That takes us on to business arising or unfinished business. And we have Sarah Enslin from CBCL with us regarding the wastewater treatment plant pre-design progress report. So providing some interim reports for information. So I will turn the floor over to Sarah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry about that. Okay. My name is Sarah Enslin, and I'm a process engineer with CBCL. This evening, I'll be giving you an update on the wastewater treatment plant project, what we found so far, and what we will do next. No decision is needed right now. The building condition assessment report is the first deliverable of this project. And the aim of this report is to predict what work will be needed to maintain the building in good condition over the next 25 years. This considers both the existing condition of the building and the typical lifespan of the components used in this building. The building condition assessment report gives a snapshot of the condition of the building and also the building systems, for example, electrical, plumbing, roofing, cladding, and it focuses on the building and doesn't include process items that are directly used for treating wastewater. The aim is to predict typical maintenance needs, but it is not an in-depth study of code compliance. So the main findings for the process building, I'll actually divide this section into three for the three different buildings that are on site. The process building itself is almost 20 years old. And because of that, some of the items are nearing the end of their reliable service life. The building is in acceptable condition, and it's about as expected due to its age. Since there are items at the end of the reliable service life, we recommend that planned replacement of these items should go into the town budget and be planned for in due course. I'll now give a couple of examples for this particular building. The roofing in this building is probably original to the building, and this type of roofing has a 20-year reliable service life. Therefore, we recommend that planned replacement of it take place within the next 5 years in order to continue to provide good service for the building and protection to the building. In addition, some of the mechanical systems are also likely original. These also have a service life of approximately 20 years. In particular, the air handling unit that serves the lab and the office, the water heater, and some of the exhaust fans and the supply fans will need replacement within the next 5 years based on their predicted service life. We also noted that some of the electrical equipment, especially in the process room, has significant corrosion damage. This is probably related to Hurricane Dorian and should also be replaced as soon as possible. During the site visit, we also noted that there was some damage to the exterior lighting that appeared to be caused by faulty controls, which didn't allow it to be turned off. As the controls are repaired, then we would recommend that the exterior lighting be replaced with high efficiency LED lighting instead. And there are also some other minor repairs that are recommended for items damaged by corrosion, some deteriorated finishes like flooring and concrete surface wear, some minor cracks in the concrete, and there are other minor deficiencies in this building, which are included in the total opinion of probable, opinion of probable cost. So moving on to the bioreactor building. This is the building that's behind the main process building, and it has a curved fiberglass roof over the top of it. It houses the biological process, and it is also original to the plant, so it is almost 20 years old. During the site visit, which was carried out by a team of experienced assessors, they found that this building was also in acceptable condition and about as expected due to its age. It has a fiberglass roof, which will need to be replaced in 20 or more years, but in the meantime, washing and a coating that's UV resistant would help to extend the life of this fiberglass roof. There are also some repairs that are recommended to corroded doors and hardware, some electrical components, railings, and exterior stairs and railings. There's also an electrical junction box that should be properly supported in this building as soon as possible. In addition, the interior lighting, as the ballasts in the lighting fail, these could be replaced with high efficiency LED lighting. The biofilter fan building is the newest building at the treatment plant. It was built in 2017, and therefore it's in near new condition, and there's nothing in it that, upon our assessment, requires replacement in the near future. It houses the biofilter fan for the odor control process. We prepared an opinion of probable cost to, in general, replace the items and, where noted in the report, repair the identified deficiencies. These costs are provided so that the town has an idea of what will most likely be required for budget in terms of global budgeting purposes to do the capital maintenance required on these buildings and keep them in good operating condition. So for example, in the next 5 years, and also in the 5-year period after that, we would anticipate approximately $300,000 of repair work in each of these 5-year periods in order to keep up with the capital maintenance on the buildings and keep them in good condition. The next steps with this part of the project are to revise the report where requested by town staff upon their review and to finalize it. And at this point, I'd be happy to take any questions on the building condition assessment.
All right, thank you, Sarah, for that interim report. I see the Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through to Sarah. Sarah, in your your near-term building condition assessment, does that include like the short-term, repairs that are mentioned?
On which section is that, please?
Well, you show the near-term upgrades that is mentioned in your report for the systems. Is that included in like the first 0 to 5 years, the $295,000?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right,
yes,
thank
for
you.
example, the roofing replacement and HVAC replacement in the process building, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, Council, for Sarah at this stage? No, seeing none. All right, you can continue to the next section, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. All right, now I'll go on to give brief updates on the other portions of work that are included in this project. The first of these is the outfall extension to extend the wastewater treatment outfall from its current location to a different location that would give better performance for the town and better mixing of the effluent in the harbor. And the stage that we're at right now is we're in the process of a technical assessment of all the options in order to narrow down to 2 to take forward for further engineering design work. During our work to date, we've consulted with town staff and the harbor master, and we've identified together 6 different options. There are 4 extension options that are being considered that are within the front harbor and 2 that are outside of the front harbor. And we're comparing these with the existing outfall location to determine how much better these other options could be. The criteria that we considered in particular were that we needed a location with at least 2 meters depth of water in order to provide the required depth for the outfall itself and the diffusers. It needed to be at least 100 meters away from shore so that it wasn't nearly as close to shore as the existing outfall. And one thing that was very clear was that no reduction in the depth of the channel, the shipping channel, would be acceptable in order to maintain full use of the working harbor and to allow vessels of the maximum size that can use the harbor to continue to come into the harbor. And we have learned so far that there are considerable differences between the options in terms of how well the effluent is dispersed. For example, the locations that are in the inner harbor, further into the inner harbor, don't disperse effluent as well or provide as good performance as ones that are further out into the harbor. And we're continuing to work on this phase of the project, and more information on all of the options will be provided following completion of the technical assessment. There are also a number of near-term item upgrades that are at the wastewater treatment plant itself. And I'll go into these a little bit on the next slide. But our progress to date is that we have set design criteria for all of the items that are included. And we've been contacting equipment suppliers to find out budget prices and get more information about the options available for these upgrades. The next step for this portion of the project is to produce designs for each item and make drawings for town staff review. And these near-term items cover a wide variety of things, including process equipment that is at the end of its reliable design life, some items to address safety concerns or improve safety within the plant, also ones to improve plant performance, like online instrumentation and adding additional ultraviolet disinfection capacity, and as well to protect the plant against problems like floods and power outages. So I won't go into detail on these, but that's the range of types of items that are being considered here.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I will open it up to, oh, sorry, you weren't done.
I have one more slide before, yes. So there's one more aspect to this project that is to see how the wastewater treatment plant could be expanded in order to allow for the Project Lunenburg population increases that are planned in the town and desired in the town. And so for this, we've set design criteria for an expanded plant. This is based on the proposed population increases associated with Project Lunenburg. And we've sent requests to equipment suppliers to gather equipment or information and pricing. We're looking at 3 main technologies for this proposed expansion. One is the moving bed bioreactor and dissolved air flotation technology, which is the same that is used at the existing plant, but with an expanded capacity to meet the additional loading. The second is a membrane bioreactor technology, which uses a fine membrane and forces the bacteria and water mixture through the membrane in order to separate the pollutants and bacteria from the treated water. And the third is a sequencing batch reactor, which uses large tanks with alternating sequences of aeration and settling in order to to treat and clean the wastewater. The next steps with this are to produce process schematics and compare sizing to the available area on site, and then submit these for town staff review. So now I would be pleased to take any questions about any of the other aspects of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and apologies for jumping the gun. We will now open the floor if councillors have questions of Sarah, and I see Councillor Sanford.
So I'm just wondering, in the last slide where you're talking about the technologies, thinking that the technologies are currently 20 years old, are there new or other technologies that we should be considering as opposed to the same technologies 20 years later?
Well, that is because, or yes, that's a good point. And that's why we're not just considering the one technology that the town already has, but also some other ones that are more up and coming, I suppose you could say, or can produce better effluent quality. And once we've gathered all the information, then we'll be able to do a comparison of not only the existing technology and whether it can be expanded for the additional capacity, and the alternative technologies that could be used. And I think we do have a range of the sorts of technologies that are both commercially proven to work well and also produce very good results and be forward-looking.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor Halverson.
Yes, thanks. I guess in line with what Councillor Sanford was asking, the technology or the upgrades you've got listed here, how do those align? I guess how much of those could be reused if for some reason either we continue on with the process we have now or decide to switch and go a different way in our treatment systems?
For the near-term upgrades?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these are things that we need to do just to keep it running until we decide what we're going to do. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And we will look into that as well for how each of those new technologies is able to reuse the infrastructure and buildings from the existing plant. And I do expect that there will be some that can better reuse the items that you already have or need to upgrade in the near future, and some that will not be able to do that as well. And that will also be considered in the final report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Sir, how much weight would you give like the system that gets chosen versus, the space? So, we're looking at, over the next 25 years, spending $1.5 million in the building, right? Mm-hmm. So, we might find that, system, A, we'll call it the Buick, is the one we really want, but we only now have a garage that fits Civic. And how is that gonna, how do you rationalize the two there? How does that weighting place on the system that we pick?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a cost associated with building additional building space in order to house a larger treatment process. So we will be looking at ways to fit new technologies or these technology options within the existing footprint where possible. Another factor that needs to be considered is that the geotechnical conditions at that site are difficult to work with. So minimizing additional building space will be beneficial to avoid problems with foundations and the geotechnical constraints on that site. But it is possible to expand the building and then make more space for a process that needs more space. And if that's the case and that looks like the best option, then that's what we would recommend.
Yeah. And the sequencing batching reactor, that's new. We haven't looked at that before, correct?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
That one is probably the one that uses the most space. It uses large tanks because all the functions are provided in that one tank. So I expect that one will be the one that stretches the limits of the site the most.
Does that system use polymers in this process?
It does not, no.
And,
Neither, sorry.
oh, no, yeah, no, that on the membrane doesn't, it's just a DAS system that used polymers, yeah.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, you know, again, when you weigh that out, does that have an influence on then the outflow pipe, you know, placement and whatnot?
I expect it would have some influence on that, because if the polymers were no longer required in the system, then it would mean that the exact siting of the outfall would be less sensitive, certainly. So that needs to be considered as an integral part of the project. If there's a treatment process that affects where you would want to put the outfall, then you need to consider that as a pair.
Yeah, so you'll look at that comprehensively when you give us a final presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great, very good, thank you.
All right, further questions of Sarah at this stage? Okay. I have two, Sarah, just in terms of the outfall. You're exploring 6 different options, 4 within and 2 outside the harbor, and looking at inner harbor solutions. And I'm just wondering, could you specify for me a little bit more? And I'm sure this will come in your later presentation. You know, where are you classifying inner versus outer, or within or without, or that kind of thing?
Okay, well, the ones that are within the front harbor are between the area where the harbor ends. They're the ones that are not within the harbor are clearly not within the front harbor.
So beyond Battery Point.
Yes, they're beyond Battery Point, and they're
Okay.
completely outside of the front harbor.
Yeah.
And all of the other ones are in different locations within the front harbor, some farther back and some farther towards the front of the front harbor.
Okay. That's all I had. All right, are there any further questions at this stage? Seeing none. Thank you, Sarah. We will look forward to your fuller, more finalized report in due course.
Thank you very much.
All right, that takes us on to proposed committees of council policy, amendment to dissolve the Recreation Committee and Active Transportation Subcommittee. There is a draft motion there. Notice of motion has been given, so is it anybody's pleasure? I believe it was Councillor Halverson who gave the notice of motion. Is it anybody's pleasure to second that? Councillor Bertels. Is there any discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Oh, sorry, Councillor Halverson, you had discussion or debate.
Wasn't really discussion debated, just once more wanted to reiterate, you know, the towns, and thanks to the committee members for the work and the commitment they've put into the Recreation Committee. So just did not want to leave an opportunity to recognize them one more time before we dissolve the committee. So.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson. That is well and duly noted. Sorry for that, folks. We'll just take that vote one more time. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, that takes us on to committee recommendations, and I see under Planning Advisory Committee, there are 3 recommendations from the April 12th meeting of the Planning Advisory Committee, and I have Councillor Sanford noted there. Would you like to move those motions, Councillor Sanford?
Yes, I would like to move the motions, and can we move all 3 at one time, or do we do them each individually?
We can move all 3 at one time if you like.
I would like to suggest that, yes.
Okay. Is there a seconder for those motions as presented? Councillor Bertels? Are there any questions, or would we like the planner to give us a quick summary of the intent of the motions? Ms. Sutherland, are you with us?
Sorry, I thought that was a question. No. I just wanted to speak for all 3 applications that the public participation program was followed completely. We advertised, the neighbors were notified, and Planning Advisory held a public information meeting prior to the recommendation. all three applications meet the intent of municipal planning strategy. So it's properly before council for first reading and to set a public hearing date. Their first two applications are very similar. It's to add a third residential unit to an existing 2-unit building. And the final application is to, it's listing certain residential properties in the marine industrial zone so they can be afforded full property rights under the act.
Okay. Any questions or discussion or debate at this stage? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. All right. That takes us on to C. There are 2 recommendations from the Heritage Advisory Committee, and I will ask Councillor Ernst as the chair if he would like to move those recommendations.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think maybe in the case of these ones, if we could move them separately, they are not particularly related to one another.
Okay.
So I suppose I'll start by moving the initial motion, which is the Heritage Recognition Awards for the properties aforementioned.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sanford? Are there any questions, discussion, or debate? Perhaps we'll let Mr. McDonald provide a summary for council's benefit.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hopefully you can hear me okay. We received some recommendations with regards to the Heritage Recognition Awards. We advertised 4 nominations and they were reviewed by the Heritage Advisory Committee at our last meeting. And the committee wishes to proceed with 5 nominations. They are 12 Burma Road, 71 Prince Street, 25 Hobson Street, 97 Colback Street, and 169 Montague Street. So the HAC would like to recommend those for the Heritage Recognition Awards for 2021. And looking forward to council's resolution and approval with regards. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions of Mr. McDonald or any discussion or debate on this item? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. And then if you'd be so kind, Councillor Ernst with the second item.
Yes, so the second item is for a recommendation to council to nominate the Lunenburg Academy. Heather, would it be possible to bring the motion up once more? Just to make sure I have the wording correct. Yes, recommend to council the staff complete the nomination process to nominate the Lunenburg Academy Restoration for a Nova Scotia Heritage Trust Award.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sanford again. Are there any questions? Deputy Mayor.
Well, my only question would be that if we were fortunate enough to receive this award, would it restrict us in any way in our use or future use or ownership of this building?
If I may, through Your Worship, no, it will not affect our ability to use the building in any way, shape, or form. It's regulated by the land use bylaw, and that's a town document, so there's no issues with that at all. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Moser stole my thunder insofar as sometimes these awards, though prestigious, generate monetary obligations without the corresponding monetary benefits. So I had that same question. Any further questions on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion, and Councillor Duggan, I assume voting in favor?
Sorry, I was late to the game, voting in favor.
Okay, so that was everyone voting in favor. And the motion is passed. Now we have one recommendation from the Committee of the Whole and one notice of motion. So the recommendation is to approve the utility budgets for the year in the amounts listed, and I would look to see if it's anyone's pleasure to make that motion simply because I am the chair, so I wouldn't bring it forward to this meeting. Deputy Mayor, moving the approval of the utility budgets, seconded by Councillor Halverson. Is there any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Then consequent to the winding up of the Recreation Committee, that necessitates amendments to our provincial volunteer recognition and representative volunteer selection process policy. And coming from Committee of the Whole, Councillor Halverson is giving notice of motion to that effect. Councillor Halverson, can we consider said notice so given?
Please do.
Okay. That will appear on our next meeting agenda for final approval. That takes us on to section 9, which is new business. The recreation capital budget. There is a request for a pre-approval for a floor scrubber. Is it anybody's pleasure to move that motion as presented? Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Ernst. I'm wondering, we have the Recreation Director with us, so she could just summarize that quickly for council and those watching.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we are looking for pre-approval of a floor scrubber. The department currently does not have a working floor scrubber, and we're using a mop and bucket to clean the auditorium floor. So it'd be wonderful to get a pre-approval for that. Thanks.
I see. So it has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, that takes us on to the late breaking request that's been added regarding a tree removal as regards a development process. And I'm wondering if the CAO can just speak to that to contextualize it for council.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the letter from Mr. Rolfson outlined it well. It is a town tree, albeit there is a portion that is also on private property. The private property owner, Mr. Benton, has agreed to incur half of the cost and has arranged for an arborist to have it removed. It is outside of our policy provisions that the tree be removed under these circumstances, but they are extenuating as they wish to proceed with the development. We have had some similar situations to this on occasion when a property owner has wanted to build an outer building or an extension, whatnot. And what we have done is put the matter before council for consideration. We always ask the person who is seeking to remove the tree to ensure that the neighborhood is doesn't have any concerns, because ordinarily under our policy, there is a right of appeal if anyone has a concern about a particularly mature tree, as we try to maintain our urban canopy, to express their concerns to council and see if there's any other options. In this instance, there does not appear to be any options. The applicant has contacted neighbors as best as they can during the COVID period, and there does not appear to be any objections. And they are in agreement with making a donation to the town in order that a street tree can be purchased and planted either nearby or in another location so that a new tree can take its place. There are some risk management issues that staff would also like to work with the applicant afterwards. Those would be things like just ensuring that the town is added as an additional insured on the arborist insurance policy, that they have workers' compensation, that sort of thing, and that there is a traffic safety plan for the removal of the tree that is acceptable to our Public Works Department, and in particular the town engineer, who is the traffic authority. So with that being said, Your Worship, the approval or the request to remove the tree is recommended by staff given those circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Renton. And I know this was a late breaking item, so I presume, Ms. Renton, that we don't have a draft motion available.
We don't, Your Worship, but we could incorporate or develop a motion that would incorporate some of those things that we've just talked about now, and reference the letter that Mr. Benton and Mr. Rolfson provided. And I understand Mr. Rolfson is available for comment. He has zoomed in, so if there's any questions.
Thank you. I will open the floor to see if firstly there are any questions of Mr. Rolfson or Ms. Renton. Councillor Sanford.
Question for Mr. Rolfson through the chair. To what extent has there been consideration about the tree remaining and the subsequent construction taking place? I'm assuming that the tree is going to be impacted by the construction.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, the tree has already been impacted by construction because the foundation excavation began today. The design of the house, this is the dwelling that's going to, that we're planning to put on this property is what I would refer to as a prototype duplex for Old Town Lunenburg. So it's a very tricky design problem, and it takes, because it's 2 dwelling units on an Old Town lot, it takes up virtually as much space as is legally available on that property. Given that, plus the off-street parking requirements, plus my desire as the designer to align the facade of this house with the neighboring buildings, means that the front street-facing wall of this duplex is only 5 feet 4 inches from the public right-of-way. The tree is about 5 feet or slightly less from the public right-of-way. It's on the public right-of-way, but it's literally touching the property line. So it's a very unfortunate situation, but under the circumstances, the design could not accommodate this elm tree.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions of Councillor Howes?
I guess this would not be so much for Mr. Rolfson, but through the chair to our CEO. Is there any concern about setting a precedent? Mr. Rolfson indicates this could be a design that other people may want to pursue. Are we worried about there may be a precedent we're setting?
Well, there's always a risk of doing that. You're quite right. I guess it would depend upon the situation, the size of the lot, where the duplex or other construction would take place, and where any town trees might exist. I think that's why such a request comes before council, because it is unique. You don't want to be in a situation where you're routinely removing mature trees that are otherwise healthy without making these kind of provisions. So I'm hopeful that we are not setting a precedent, and that, you know, in all instances, I think it behooves the developer, the owner of the land, to try and maintain mature trees as well whenever they can. There's so many benefits to so doing, and as well for council to be, you know, to look carefully at these kind of applications that come forward, so we don't set a common precedent for doing it.
With council's indulgence, I will allow Mr. Rolfson to make a comment.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to the councilor's question. I don't think this tree will set a precedent. I think it's wandered offline. If you look at the other trees on that street, they're much further away from the property line. If you can talk about much within the kind of boulevard spaces that we have in Old Town. This tree somehow got placed in, I think, the wrong place initially, and I would hope that there aren't very many other situations in Old Town Lunenburg that match this. So I don't think it will be setting a precedent.
Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Your Worship. Well, I am a lover of trees, but I would go ahead and move the motion to have it removed as the CAO described.
Okay. It has been so moved. It is seconded by Councillor Ernst. Perhaps just so councillors are aware of what it is they're voting on, the CAO can encapsulate what would be included in that motion.
Well, I'm trying to type and keep up with you at the same time. So you are approving the removal of the tree as per the request of the applicant, Mr. Benton, set out in the letter that Mr. Wolfson submitted on his behalf. There would be conditions including that the developer themselves are arranging for the removal of the tree with a qualified arborist or a person of like skills who has workers' compensation, liability insurance that will cover the town as well, that they will incur half of the costs that Mr. Rolfson's outlined in his letter of removing the tree, as well that there will be coverage for the town, if I didn't mention that before, through insurance as an additional insured, that the applicant will make a donation of $200 to have a new tree planted in its somewhere nearby or elsewhere. And I was trying to think of the other things that we might want to wrap up. I think that's about it, Your Worship. Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, that was a pretty good encapsulation. And I see with these written motions, we're all getting into practice working on the fly.
Yeah.
With council's indulgence, once again, I'll allow Mr. Rolfson to comment.
I just want to thank the CAO and the council for responding so rapidly to my rather late request that this issue be addressed. Mr. Benton and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rolfson. Is there any further questions, discussion, or debate on this motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. All right, that takes us on to item 10, which is to meet in camera pursuant to the listed items relevant to section 22(2) of the Municipal Government Act. And I will entertain a motion to move in camera and discuss those items. Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Councillor Birtles. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried, and with council's indulgence, we'll allow 10 minutes for a health break and reconvene at 7:13.